I never really saw you as a guy who delved into political issues per se. You seem more willing, interested, and I must say, maybe more conservative than I thought you were. Is that a fair assessment?
Not at all.
Okay.
Because
David Pakman gets totally owned by Dr. Phil. This should be no surprise here, but David Pakman was up to his slimy ways once again, but Dr. Phil totally outmaneuvered the sliminess, gave some great answers, and totally schooled David Pakman. Let's see what Dr. Phil has to say.
Phil McGraw, also known as Dr. Phil, host of Dr. Phil Prime Time on Merritt Street Media, and author of the new book, We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. You know, I'm very interested to speak to you today because in preparation for our interview, I've been watching some of the Fox News appearances, looking at the book, etc. I never really saw you as a guy who delved into political issues per se. You seem more willing, interested, and I must say, maybe more conservative than I thought you were. Is that a fair assessment?
Not at all.
Okay.
Because I am so not political, you can't even believe it. And I'll tell you why. I know nothing about politics. And, and I know why you say that. It sounds like it.
Right.
I talk about these things as cultural issues from a psychological, psychosocial standpoint, how they affect families and people. And they do overlap with some of the things that politicians talk about, but they talk about it from a political standpoint, funding standpoint, how they can get this bill or that bill through. Couldn't care less. But I am interested in those issues in terms of how they impact families in their day-to-day pursuit of life and peace and being able to raise their family in a healthy environment. So there's a lot of overlap, but I don't talk about it from a political standpoint because I frankly don't know enough about the politics of it all.
That's
I'm just willing to admit that. I'm just willing to admit it. I don't think a lot of other people know either. I'm just willing to admit it.
I don't want to make this like, famously there's this story of literary critics were talking about the symbolism in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and he would tell them, that's not at all what I meant. And so I don't want to make this where I tell you about how political all the stuff you say is, but the reason why I say it is a lot of the language in the book, and when you talk about issues like immigration and culture and others, it seems as though it alludes to going back to the good old days, individual decisions in the style that many Republicans now talk about with regard to schooling and parenting, et cetera. But you're saying it's just not the case.
No, and that doesn't mean that there aren't politicians on both sides of the aisle that talk about these issues. But if you really think about raising a family in America, whether it's now or 50 years ago or 20 years down the road, we still have to keep our eye on what I think are core issues in America. And I think the backbone of America is the family unit. I really think that if we have strong families, if we have strong family values, and I think that our families in America, as you've heard me say and read me say, are under attack. And I think some of those attacks are unintended consequences of technology, for example. But these are things that, whether politicians talked about them or not, if they tried to legislate about them or not, I would still be talking about.
So give some examples of that. What are some of the attacks facing families?
Well, I think about 08, 09, we had what I think has been the biggest change to human life since the Industrial Revolution. I think before the Industrial Revolution, we were a very agricultural civilization, right? People worked on the farms. We grew what we needed. But then we became mechanized, and I think back then we were 95% agricultural. Now we're 1% agricultural. Why? Because everything is so mechanized and people move to the cities and all. Well, the biggest thing that's happened since then, in my opinion, was the advent of the smartphone, the internet became so prolific. And I mean, think about it. We're walking around in '08, '09 with as much computing power in our hands with smartphones, laptops, iPads, that we had when we did the moon shot. When we put a man on the moon, we didn't have as much computing power as we can hold in our hands as of '08, '09, and it changed everything. And people stopped being so involved with the reality of life and started getting involved in virtual life. And it's only gone more and more in that direction since that time. And also at that time, we started seeing the highest levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness in young people since records were kept. And
I'm with you on this
changed.
one. I'm with you on this one. Jonathan Haidt has studied and written about this extensively. You and I are aligned on this one. What about the ones that fall under what you call the tyranny of the fringe? Because I don't think the smartphone example falls under that category, right?
No, that's why I say some of this is the unintended consequences of like technology. But then we've got some where we've got people that are just trying to change some of the core values in America, core values of family, trying to rewrite history. And we've got people that are coming in saying, well, we want to change history, we want to change what kids are being taught in history, we want to change biology, we want to change all of the things that we have for 100 years had empirical data to support.
But tell me more. I don't want to gloss over this. I really want to understand this. Changing history. Okay, what?
David is so slimy. You know, he always has to play dumb. Like he doesn't, like we all know, we all know what Dr. Phil is talking about, you know? And listen, you know, I understand David Pakman, he's an interviewer. I understand he wants Dr. Phil to articulate his arguments and stuff. I get it. But, you know, the whole beginning of this argument is David Pakman saying, hey, you're a conservative. I think you're a conservative and blah, 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 blah. And then Dr. Phil straight up says, nah, I'm not really into politics. I'm coming at this as a social thing. So then David Pakman's like, yeah, but in your book, you said the family's under attack. Explain that. And Dr. Phil explains it. But now David Pakman is like, yeah, but you know, like it seems like David Pakman's the one trying to fit this all into politics. Like Dr. Phil straight up said, yeah, I'm not really coming at this from a political slant or anything. This is just socially. And you have Pakman here trying to make it political. I don't know. That's what I'm getting for this. What do you guys think? Sound off in the comments below. Give this video a like. Let's continue.
What was the history that used to be taught that now has been changed by the tyranny of the fringe?
Well, you know, pick an area. We can talk about biology, where we have always had two sexes.
But what about history? Now, just to pick history, not biology, because you said history, biology. What about history?
Well, there's a lot of history to biology, and you would be missing a big point to pretend that there's not historical biology. But if you want to talk about history, we can, not in biology, but just talk about the history of mankind.
Yeah.
We've got areas where they don't want to talk about slavery. We had one a group of people that wanted to start describing slavery in history books as involuntary relocation.
Right.
This was not involuntary relocation. This was slavery. And we've got people that are wanting to rename schools because people that were doing what were the mores and folkways of the times now would clearly be doing things against the law, certainly against mores and folkways, because they were slave owners at the time, are saying, well, now we have to tear down these statues, we have to rename these schools, and we don't want to teach about them. We have to learn from our mistakes as a society. We can't pretend those things didn't happen. They did happen. They were dark and ugly times in American history. We don't want to pretend those things weren't there.
So let me see if I understand.
Yeah, Dr. Phil is absolutely correct. But on top of that, too, it's also taught in schools. It's taught in a way where, oh, because these bad things happened in our past, that's why things are bad now. Like, that's why, like, because we had slavery, oh, well, that's why blacks have it so hard now. And it's like they're taught in a way to prove, like, we live in a systemic racist society now, an oppressive society now, and to demonize white people now, and to treat all minorities as if they're victims now. That's another aspect of this whole, like, the school system, that our history, our past, is also, like, taught in a way that demonizes groups of people now and are in our country now. You know, it's like, you know, we don't even have Christopher Columbus Day anymore. I mean, listen, say what you want. I know there's a lot of people who don't like Christopher Columbus because, he did a lot of some bad things or whatever like that. I'm going to be completely 100% honest here. I don't know a whole heck of a lot about Christopher Columbus. And to be honest, I don't really care. All I know is, how did Christopher Columbus contribute to the founding of America? Oh, he discovered America? Oh, but he wasn't the first one here. There's already Native Americans here. Yeah, I know. But he was the first European to discover it. And without Christopher Columbus, who knows where this country would be at right now? Like, would it be better now? Maybe. Would it be worse now? It could be too. But the fact of the matter is, without Christopher Columbus landing over here in North America, we might not have the same America that you see today. And I know a lot of people hate this country, but they seem to have no problem enjoying the benefits and the riches that this country offers and freedoms that this country offers. But yeah, that's just one of many examples of how this fringe minority here is trying to erase our history. What do you guys think? Sound off in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel if you like content like this. Let's continue.
So if I hear you correctly, you're not in agreement with those who want to minimize the tragedy and brutality of slavery, but you also want to keep the school names. If a school is named after a slave owner, you're also okay with that because it will remind us and we will learn from it. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think you're oversimplifying what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're wanting to change American history to pretend that these people did not exist, and you want to measure them by today's yardstick rather than the yardstick at the time, that's what is referred to as presentism. And that's like saying, okay, you're going to drive through a neighborhood and the speed limit is 20. And you drive through that neighborhood doing 20, and then they come along and say, you know what, we're going to change the speed limit to 10, and we're going to give you a ticket for speeding when the speed limit was 20. It's now 10, but you weren't speeding when you were doing 20, but now it's 10. We're going to give you a retroactive ticket for doing what was acceptable at the time. That's called presentism. We're going to take what was done back at the time, pull it up into the current time, and condemn you for not knowing what was going to be acceptable 200 years later than when you did it. And I think that is really narcissistic and arrogant, and rewriting history instead of letting people learn from the mistakes that were made in America and that we need to learn from so we don't make those mistakes again. Because some of those people also did some really good things at the time. We don't need to endorse everything they did, but we need to acknowledge the good and the bad.
And that's precisely what a lot of these school systems do. They only acknowledge the bad and really demonize them. They only point out the bad. Like before it was taught like, oh, like all the good things they did. But now it's taught, well, these are all the bad things they did. And this is why we shouldn't freaking have statues of them or whatnot. Or this is why we shouldn't have a holiday for them or whatnot. And all this stuff. Like these people are definitely using this to kind of change the way America is right now. Like they are trying to change this country. They are trying to reset this country. That's why they've torn down statues. That's why they want to get rid of certain holidays. They want to reset. And I'm sorry, but no. And especially if this reset that you want is leading to things like, transing children, then no, I do not want this reset. I also would like to go back to how it was when we could define what a woman was. And if your new hero is, say, George Floyd versus Thomas Jefferson or something, I'm sorry, but Thomas Jefferson accomplished way more than George Floyd did. And we could make the same arguments about George Floyd, about how the bad things that he's done. But the same people who want to reset and change this country, will just ignore all that and try to look at the positive things. So it's BS. They're all full of it, pretty much. Just like David Pakman here. And I think Dr. Phil did a great job. But what do you guys think? Sound off in the comments below. And if you want to see more of David Pakman making an ass out of himself, I got a whole playlist for you on the left-hand corner.